Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, IT Outsourcing. It's not cost savings. My name is David Goodstein. I'm the webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It's our pleasure to be a co-host of today's event with the W Group. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. Before the session, we encourage you to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, please click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click on the submit button. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the recorded webinar. It will also be available at outsourcing.com. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Dan Goodstein. Dan?
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. Dan Goodstein here. I head up the Outsourcing Institute, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. We have a really exciting conversation here today, actually a panel discussion with quite an exciting group of people. We've got a few former CIOs and some of the top industry advisors in this space to talk about a topic it's not really a new debate, but it's certainly a relevant one, I think, now more than ever, actually. So excited to have this conversation today and to hear everybody's input and feedback on this. Before we jump in, real quick about the Outsourcing Institute, for those who don't know us, we are the largest professional association of outsourcing executives worldwide with 70,000 members globally. And our primary goal is really to be a resource for those who buy and manage IT and outsourcing services, as well as helping the service provider and advisor community get their message out to the marketplace. So before we jump into the actual discussion, I want to introduce Dominic Colasante, who's the CMO over at W Group and the sponsor and contributor for today's webcast. And I want to get your perspective, Dominic, on this topic of IT outsourcing is not about cost savings. I'm thinking there's at least a dozen or two people on this call right now that are thinking, yeah, right. Well, outsourcing is definitely about cost savings, but hopefully they're intrigued enough to be here, and we created a white paper together on this topic. So maybe you could briefly introduce the W Group and talk about your reasoning and perspective on this before we jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That sounds great. And we're going to change the skeptics today. So I appreciate the time, and thank you to everyone for dialing in today. So first of all, when Dan and I were talking about the session, it's certainly not a new topic, but we think it's a topic that warrants conversation. The speed of change in technology and what's available out in the market today really changes how this needs to be looked at, and that's why we put this paper together. I thought at least to spend a couple minutes up front talking about what the paper is and also just give you a feel for who W Group is because it frames the context. By the way, as well, we're also live tweeting, so there's a hashtag up in the top right, OI Webcast. Feel free to use that to converse with some folks online. But just to frame the context of where we're coming from on this, so if you haven't heard of W Group, we are a technology management consulting firm and a sourcing advisory firm. We've been around for about 20 years, and we've worked with some of the top IT leaders in the world on transformative outsourcing projects. Some of the most complex and transformative deals in the world, and our whole perspective is in aligning outsourcing towards business outcomes. And we do that because of the staffing model that our firm has. Everyone in the firm is either a CIO, they're an IT leader, or they're a business leader. And we have a different perspective on outsourcing from the other advisors in the market. I'm going to share more about that today and share more about some of the things we've seen in the world. On to the paper. So why did we write this? I was attending one of the largest conferences on outsourcing a couple months back, and headline slide in the keynote was, cost savings continues to remain the top reason for outsourcing. And that's a topic that I think warrants conversation. And I think that that's a debate that's going on for a long time. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of misunderstanding, I think, about what the real value that outsourcing can provide is. So the pace of change in today's world, if you have the wrong answer for that, it can significantly put your organization at a disadvantage competitively and in your ability to support the outcomes that the business needs. I talk to CIOs and IT leaders often, and what I see is a constant change on the status quo. I see a constant change in how they operate. I see a need for speed and flexibility. And I was just having a conversation with a CIO a couple weeks ago, a CIO at a large bank, and the CIO told me, business is great. Revenue is growing fantastically. Profits are where they need to be. The company's running appropriately, and yet I'm completely restructuring my outsourcing service model. And I'm doing that because there's a kid right now in his basement coming up with a solution that can put me out of business in the next 5 years if I don't change. That's a perspective that I hear all too often in the industry, and I think it really makes the point clear that this CIO, this IT leader, is on the hunt for speed, agility, flexibility, scale. He's working to make a business impact, and he wants to make that business impact now before someone else comes up and takes his customers. That's the kind of conversation I get into often, and when you read all the press out there in the market, you also see some of this, right? CIO Magazine just came out with a stat that said that only half of IT leaders believe that the service model they have today is right for the future. There's a tremendous need for change and transformation, and really there's a tremendous change in the role of IT. IT is no longer a manager of programmers, a manager of data centers. It's now an orchestrator of getting work done from wherever, with whomever is doing the work. And that's not a new concept for many of you on the call. I think that's a common concept that most would agree to. And obviously outsourcing is critical in that model, but the real value that the IT leader and the real value that IT outsourcing brings isn't on managing that work. It's on driving the top line of the business and shifting how the IT organization and how technology runs so that it can produce a better business impact. And by the way, the work we're seeing, when you transform the business and you transform the service model and you realign IT towards where the business wants to go, it actually produces significantly more cost savings than just a price negotiation alone would. But the real focus has to be on enabling the business strategy. It has to be focused on driving that digital transformation. I don't think we really fully agree on what digital means depending on who you talk to. But the combination of automation and analytics and mobile and the Internet of Things and sort of becoming an omni-channel type organization, outsourcing is a vehicle to do that. But too often the central focus of outsourcing is on price. And we believe, and the clients we've worked with, and I think the panel discussion we're going to have this afternoon is going to share with you, is that's a way to destroy value. Focusing exclusively on price and outsourcing not only constrains innovation, but it's probably the singular greatest thing you can do to create a transactional relationship with your supplier. That's not what any IT leader I talk to wants. They have plenty of transactional suppliers. In fact, they have too many of them, and they need to consolidate those down. What they don't have enough of is partners committed to driving innovation. They don't have enough of industry suppliers that are helping them accomplish their business goals. And it really comes down to focus. It comes down to how you focus on outsourcing. For example, automation, a topic we talk about a lot, and the topic is really hot, and I know the Outsourcing Institute talks about it a lot. And too often the conversation around automation is, how many FTEs can we take out? How many tickets can we automate? How can we drive down the cost of processing incidents? And while that's a real reality of what automation produces, it's the wrong way to look at it. The way to look at it could be, how many better customer experiences could we have? How can we have less incidents altogether? How can we increase the speed and agility at which the business can compete? Those are the reasons we believe you should look at outsourcing, and those are the kind of conversations we have with our clients regularly. And if I also expand that further, I was talking to a CEO this week actually about this one, and the CEO is a CEO of a large financial services organization, thinking about outsourcing and thinking about their infrastructure and thinking about how their IT infrastructure contributes to their business model. And this individual felt that they didn't have the appropriate amount of reliability and scale in their infrastructure to drive the kind of business that they wanted to have. They're looking at outsourcing as a way to de-risk the business and drive top-line growth. And by the way, they're also looking at it as a way to take their people who are doing that sort of commodity-type work and managing an aged infrastructure environment, and they're moving them towards jobs that have higher value, like analytics, like mobility, like Internet of Things, and getting closer to their customers. This organization thinks about outsourcing as a way to drive the business further. In our mind, the real measurement of successful outsourcing is around the delivery of shareholder value. After all, as business leaders and IT leaders, that's why we're here. We're here to drive shareholder value. That's the core purpose of many of our roles. And when you look at sort of driving outsourcing and kind of unpacking that a little further, it requires a different kind of partnership that you have with your outsourced supplier. If you're an IT or business leader that's focused on extracting value from technology, you want partners. You don't want transactional suppliers. We've seen at length that many IT leaders are bringing vendor management organizations back into IT. They're building those vendor management relationship skills, those governance skills as a core competency of the IT shop, and they're not abdicating all of those responsibilities to procurement exclusively. We've seen other clients adopt innovation models for how they operate the IT shop. One organization that I spoke to recently does this thing called the Innovation Fair, where they bring all of their top suppliers in and they present to those suppliers their business strategy. And they tell the suppliers where their business is headed. That does two things. The first thing it does is it eliminates the number of proposals that you get from your supplier that are completely disconnected from what you want to accomplish and are just trying to push their tool or their technology. And it eliminates the amount of noise you get, or at least reduces it. But it also makes sure that the things that the supplier is doing are focused on the goals that you have and focused on your business strategy and your business objectives. And it moves them towards a mindset that's more in line with the mindset that you'd want them to have. And we're a huge believer in sort of the RFS type approach to outsourcing as opposed to the RFP. RFS meaning request for solution over request for proposal. The top sourcing leaders that we work with and the top IT leaders we work with believe that when you give a service provider an outline of the objectives that you want to accomplish and you give them the freedom to solution and innovate based on their core competencies to drive those objectives, that produces a far greater value than if you ask them to fill in their price for a service that you think you want. After all, I mean, outsourcing in our mind is about outcomes, and what you want is the outcome. And that approach of allowing innovation into the process and allowing flexibility drives a significant amount of innovation. A couple things to consider about this sort of business outcomes approach to outsourcing that we're really talking about here, and what a lot of organizations have adopted is you need to change the way that you manage SLAs. You need to move out of the world where you're managing sort of transactional tasks that everything is always green, and move into a world where the SLAs and the measures and the OLAs and all the metrics and KPIs are aligned to business impact. Also, we're seeing organizations think about governance differently, thinking about governance as a way to manage a partnership and manage growth and development and manage overall performance against business outcomes and not just manage the contract terms. Flexibility is one we talk about often. This is definitely a buyer's market right now because of the options around cloud and automation and all of the different outsourcing providers out there. The buyer has power, and flexibility is something that every organization should get in their outsourcing relationships. Termination clauses for convenience are a fraction of what they once were, and you can't be locked into outsourcing contracts as the world changes because the world changes so fast. The technology changes so fast, and you need the ability to pivot and flex as new things come about. And lastly, I mean, we're seeing some organizations also go into the gain sharing piece, which completely changes the focus of the outsource provider from focusing on not getting penalized for SLAs and focused on getting mutual value that's beneficial to both you and them. So in summary, before we open it up to the panel, I mean, we believe that there's a real case to be made for changing the conversation around outsourcing, focusing on a business strategy type project, not an IT procurement cycle, focusing on re-architecting the service delivery model and embracing transformation and new thinking to drive that business impact. We believe you have to collaborate with the business at every step of the game where you can, and that we believe that sourcing leaders, IT leaders, outsourcing leaders have a pivotal kind of position to be the accelerator of change, not an inhibitor as this technology environment really transforms. I'll leave you with one thought before we go to the panel. So I often hear from a lot of my peers in the market, right, other advisory firms, other sourcing advisory groups, that a 20% cost save can be achieved by renegotiating your outsourcing contract and modernizing the deal. That's a price negotiation in most cases. In the last 5 deals that we've led, focused on this business outcomes approach, focused on this transformation approach, we've seen savings averaging 49%. That's 49% cost savings. That wasn't the reason we set out to do these projects. The reason we set out was to help the clients lower risk, help them increase their speed, improve agility, drive flexibility, and realign their IT operations and their IT service model towards the business strategy. We set out to accomplish those business objectives, which required transforming the way the service delivery model worked and how the outsourcing model worked, and it produces, in our case, of deals over $100 million in total value, 49% cost savings based on transformation, and you get a more transformed model that's better aligned to outcomes, that's more in line with where the business wants to go. So if I had a closing thought, when you architect towards the goal of driving the business in the right direction, massive cost savings follow, but the goal is transforming the business. So that's a bit about what we've seen. Let me turn it back over to Dan, and we'll get started with the panel to talk more about that.
Thanks, Dominic. So I'm going to introduce our esteemed panel here. We have with us Harry Wallacey, who heads up W Group. We have Mike Lang, the former CIO of Honeywell. We have Phil Newmeyer, the CIO. Well, Phil, you've been in a couple different places, right? Some consumer products companies, pharmaceutical, banking experience as a CIO. And Steve Koper, also from W Group. So I want to give you all a chance to kind of introduce yourselves, maybe share briefly some of the work you've done and how you've approached outsourcing. Let's go left to right. Maybe Harry, we could start with you.
Okay, thank you. Like I said, I'm Harry Wallacey. I'm the founder and CEO of the W Group. I've been involved with outsourcing for close to 30 years. And in my past, I was the CIO at Campbell Soup for 11 years and been the president, CEO of two public companies, Safeguard Scientifics and Compucom. So I have sold outsourcing, I have bought outsourcing, and I've implemented outsourcing, and now am advising on it. So I've seen it for a long time and through a lot of different generations of IT service delivery. So Mike, maybe you want to...
Sure. Thanks, Harry. I'm Mike Lang. I was the former CIO at Honeywell, currently the managing director at Data Exchange. And over my 9+ years at Honeywell and the 16 previous years at GE, I've been involved in a lot of outsourcing, from software development, application support, infrastructure services support, and it's really, over my career I've seen it as a journey, working from initially just cost savings, but then it becoming more of a innovative service improvement activity versus just a cost savings. And I think the whole outsourcing idea has really transformed itself both internally at the companies that are doing the outsourcing, but also as the outsourced provider. So I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Mike. This is Phil. I also have probably about 30 years now of being on both sides of the desk with regard to outsourcing. I've served as CIO and operations head in large companies, consumer products, pharmaceutical, and then financial services, and have also helped build out service provider businesses where outsourcing was one of the key services provided to a variety of different industries. And certainly now at this point you can see, as things have evolved, it's really a critical part of building a business today is how you structure the way you work with a set of partners to achieve the business goals and objectives, and that's the conversation we'll have today. Steve?
Hi, Steve Koper, a managing principal with the firm, and I've got over 35 years in IT, only IT, and been working on outsourcing for probably over 20 years now. I started as a project exec with IBM. So I've sat on both sides of the table now, not only from a client perspective, but also from a service provider perspective. So we bring a unique value to the table, and most of the opportunities we're working on today are talking to service providers in terms of we'll provide you with the requirements as to what and what we need, but you tell us how, and let's work through how we can better innovate and be more flexible, and also get some cost savings, because those cost savings will be used to fund these transformational activities.
Thanks, gents. So, Harry, let me start with you, right? So let me take the contrarian view for a second. If there are critics on this webcast they're probably thinking, if IT outsourcing is not about cost save, why are the majority of the deals we're seeing still centered around cost cutting?
Mostly because they're using an advisor different than W Group, but just being, contrarian myself. I'm really not sure. I think that there are a large percentage of deals that are managed internally by procurement departments, and I think that there are processes in the marketplace that are price-focused. I can tell you my experience as both a CEO and a CIO have given me a perspective that I think is fairly unique. And even when I was a CIO, I worked for a CEO who was completely value-focused. So I'll just throw out a couple of truisms. One is that for every business transaction, there's an IT transaction. Number two, there's a generational or a technology education gap generally between general management and IT. And number three is that IT doesn't own IT anymore. IT is owned by the business. So if you think of this, there's a great deal of focus on price from general management that doesn't really understand IT, doesn't really understand what IT does. The accountability for IT can stay in IT instead of with the business and with the CIO. And that's not a comfortable place for any CIO to be in. Is that, I don't know if, like I said, this might be generational, but we have to figure out a way to get IT and service delivery as a part of the accountability of business people. Projects that include IT, and that's virtually every IT or every project that any company undertakes, should be a partnership between the business and IT. And all too often, that's just not the way it goes. So I think that's one of the reasons why there's such a focus on cost. People look at IT as sort of a necessary evil, and they are consistently trying to drive down the cost of IT service delivery rather than looking at the value that it can create.
So, Mike, do you agree?
I do agree with Harry. I think in my experience, normally within a operating budget, IT normally was one of the largest cost centers. So in my experience with Honeywell and GE, that's where a lot of the focus came. And, to Harry's point about procurement, driving so much of the contractual side of it, almost to the point at times it felt like they were actually running the IT strategy. The focus was all around cost, taking cost out, providing cost, savings to the business. For every dollar you save in one of your functional areas, that's $3 to $4 less of revenue that you need to drive in the outside market. I think where it started to change a little bit is that the cost of doing some of this outsourcing, whether it was the labor arbitrage going to an offshore type thing and saving so much money, or finding a provider that would help with customer support from an outsource perspective. People liked the idea of, I saved $1 million, but they started over time and initially didn't realize that it was probably costing them $2 million in productivity because of the fact of a lack of service, a lack of productivity, people not being able to accomplish their jobs, the noise it would put into the environment. It is just something that when you decide to go outsource, you need to make sure the business is involved. They need to be part of the discussions on where the pain points are, so that you really look and you put together a combined thing. And I think that's something that's only changed over the last 3 or 4 years. I think to Harry's point, I think you got a lot of providers out there that want to come in and help you, and they get in the door by promising a lot of cost savings and a lot of takeout from the business versus talking about not only that, but also the innovation side and the service level side. So, when there was the mad dash to go offshore in the the mid to late 90s, I think it came at a cost, and I think it just took time for people to realize that cost savings in a functional budget doesn't necessarily relate to cost savings to the business overall. And I think Dominic's point at the beginning, it's not a 20% initially. When it first started, people were getting 50, 60% cost savings, and I think it's a paradigm shift that we need to get to overall. That's my 2 cents.
So Steve, let me ask you to kind of chime in. So, I have a lot of conversations with our members around, Mike just mentioned innovation, also around transformative deals, digital, right, more and more coming up. But it seems to me the majority of businesses still spend the most of their time and the most of their budget on sort of running the business versus changing the business. Why do you think that is?
I think in one point, it's probably comfort zone. It's what they've always done, and they're going to continue to do it. I think this really, this is a breakthrough or a breakout of what everyone has been doing, and focus more on the business, engage with the business, and think about the things that you're running. Do you really need to run them? Is there some things that you can do in order to shut down or sunset some of the legacy? And to some CIOs and to some businesses that might be heresy, but these are the kinds of thoughts that are in leading CIOs' minds today, that they need to get out of keep the lights on and focus more on the more progressive, forward-thinking, transformational types of projects and initiatives to move the business forward. So that's my thought right now. It's a really change in attitude, change in focus, and making some progress and at least making an impact there.
And Phil, from a CIO's perspective, what do you think? Who's to blame here?
Well, Harry mentioned earlier about IT doesn't own IT anymore. The business owns IT, and I couldn't agree with him more. And when you think about that, everything you do in IT there has to be somebody in the business who is not only sponsoring the initiative to support, whether it's just lights on operations and continue to operate with performance, or changing the company, not only support at the beginning, but also be vested through the business case. So for everything that you do, in outsourcing, that decision has to be a business decision where there's somebody in the business who's signing up for the business case. And that's what keeps it integrated with the overall strategic business plan, because too often, if there is, whether it's driven from procurement or any other cost-driven reason, and we see this every day, there's a gap that exists. You could end up having a real problem. We see this all the time, where you make a change from an outsourcing perspective, which modifies the company's ability to deliver, execute, your capacity, or having the right skills. And you got to move at the speed of business with a sense of urgency that the business expects to go, whether it's executing on acquisitions or transforming manufacturing, whatever business model you want to change. If IT is not set up to execute on that, everybody's looking at each other, well, how did we get here, right? And that's the gap that starts to get created if one part of a company's off on some cost reduction exercise with a myopic view, right? Thinking they're saving the company all kinds of money. But if you look at a transformation portfolio of 10 or 20 strategic initiatives, each of those has a business case. That's why IT should only be a component of those business cases, where it's one transformational team. And every decision that's made about outsourcing has to factor in all of those considerations: ability to execute, speed, skills. And that's what drives the real return we were talking about earlier on this call that Dominic was talking about, is that realization of true value and shareholder value to the company. It's all about how do we build that case to get there and then execute.
So, Mike, my question is, you know, again, kind of from a CIO's perspective, or even from a sourcing executive perspective, right? Harry mentioned kind of the vendor management, things sitting with the vendor management. Is there really an incentive if you're a sourcing executive or if you're a CIO? Is there really even any incentive for you to innovate? Why not keep things business as usual? It's safe, it's secure, it's status quo. Innovation could equal risk, right? Why change? Why innovate? What's the incentive?
This is Harry. I would suggest that the greater risk is standing still. Your competitors are not standing still. It's all about competition. It's all about getting better. It's all about increasing shareholder value. If you stand still, you're not doing your job. If I were a CEO, I'd fire him immediately.
I think,
Mike, what are your thoughts?
I think you need to innovate. I think if you're going to want to invest and improve service and improve your delivery, you need to become innovative in what you're doing. And it's not always new technology. It could be process. It could be how you go to market. And that's why it's so critical to have the business involved in this innovation. Quite honestly, to Harry's point, if you're not innovating, I tell you what, the business is innovating. And from an IT perspective, you're going to have all kinds of innovation going on around you that you're going to be expected to support it sometime. And when you talk about, the budget, cost, etc., and your ability to invest and innovate, it just leaves your hands because, in my experience at times, real educated business decisions aren't being executed, and you've got a lot of shadow things that pop up that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You need, as a CIO, to be out front with your business, understanding their strategic direction and understanding how you can apply technology to help them achieve their their business goals, which should be common goals. And a lot of times a partner, an outsourcer, can help you get there. And that's why it's so important for one leg of the stool to do it on its own. In my mind, in my experience, it's been disaster because you end up with a substandard product at a higher cost that doesn't really fulfill the business needs. And that just goes back to why it's so critical for the business to be involved. And to Harry's point, I mean, it's expected of you as being the CIO to help that innovation where it makes sense. And I go back to the other thing I said. Technology for the sake of technology isn't necessarily innovation. Doing things differently, applying technology that makes sense to help the business move forward is really, I think, the focus and the mindset you need to have with outsourcing. And with that, you will get the innovation. You will get the improved service delivery. You'll get the improved customer satisfaction. And you know what? If you do those things right, you're going to get some cost savings along the way as well.
Okay, so we agree we need to innovate, right? So Steve, let me put you on the spot to answer the age-old question then. Who should pay for innovation, the client or the provider?
Well, I would suggest that perhaps it's a shared responsibility, shared risk-reward, and both parties would benefit not only from the solution, but what the benefits to the solution are. We talked earlier about partnership. We talked about having more strategic relationships, utilizing the service provider, their broad set of skills and capabilities beyond the contract. These are the kinds of discussions we're having now where that shared risk-reward sometimes comes to great benefit on some key initiatives. And everyone's motivated to participate in that kind of environment.
I would agree. This This is Mike. I would agree with Steve wholeheartedly. You know, in my experience, when I came into the role of the CIO of Honeywell, there was a movement in place that we were out renegotiating our infrastructure services, and it was something that we couldn't get anybody interested in touching other than the current provider, because our process was so inflexible that you didn't give the partner or future provider any way to even bring innovation to the thing. And I think it goes back to some of Dominic's earlier comments. The ability to partner and have the flexibility to throw ideas around in that process benefited us enormously, because we then were able to bring something together as a partnership that allowed to drive innovation, made people interested in being a partner, and allowed them to drive better profitability with their own organization.
Yep, makes sense. So Harry, you know, you sit at the table with a lot of clients on a regular basis. Many are saying that we're near the end of labor arbitrage, right? So that knowing this is still a very labor-intensive business today, how do you think the advances in digital labor, RPA, automation, how do these technologies change the model from where you're sitting?
I mean, obviously, the impact of RPA on pricing in outsourcing deals or the solutions that are being offered. But the potential of automation is almost limited across the entire supply chain. I think we're just starting on robotic process automation, and I think that this industry is going to explode. And we're just starting to see the start of it, and it's going to have a huge impact on the cost of service delivery and allow companies to
Steve, maybe you could pick up where we lost Harry a little bit there. Maybe, Steve, you could pick up a little bit on where Harry was going with that.
Sure. In terms of autonomics and introducing automation and RPA into solutions, you know, I think it's more of a continuum, or it's a journey, not an event. So anyone that's looking for the silver bullet technology to solve all their problems is not where, you know, automation should be applied. I think it's probably a progression where you're starting with, you know, maybe very structured things, and then you're going to move along a continuum, in my opinion, to different solutions and more progressive solutions over time, to more of the cognitive computing and you know, getting maybe to an artificial intelligence based, you know, solution for reducing labor, for better customer service, for robotic customer service versus having, you know, live for certain types of things. So there are many different kinds of solutions out in the marketplace that need to be evaluated, but I think the real value that's right now in today's marketplace is starting with some automating some very, very rote tasks and reducing labor and getting the resources that you have applied to focus on maybe more strategic things rather than some of these rote administrative you know, tasks. So there's tremendous value today, and there'll be tremendous value, probably even more value in the future, but it's a journey, not an event.
So Phil, have you seen this technology start kind of creeping up into the conversations you're having, and maybe you can give us a sense? I know you've been doing outsourcing deals over the course of your entire career. So how has it kind of changed today from some of the deals maybe you did in the past?
Yeah, there's no question. You know, one of the things that, you know, I've done more recently, and I've done some very big outsourcing deals in the past couple of years, and there's all kinds of ways to innovate, right? So the service providers that you're working with, you're looking at bring different types of innovation to you, and Steve mentioned the automation. That's certainly one that is really an opportunity right now. But one thing that's been around for decades is markets, innovating in geographies and markets. And when you sit down with a real entrepreneurial spirit with a partner, I mean, ultimately, you're trying to select somebody you're going into business with. And you're bringing your own business people into the table with you so they're vested in this journey to create the business outcome. But then you're sitting down and you're going to build this business together. And some of these businesses, it's outsourcing, but yet it's a business because you're talking about tens of millions of dollars, right? And it's got to be successful. And you look at why so many of them fail. I mean, there's some very obvious reasons out there why once the deal is done, the incentive is paid all up front to whoever's doing the deal. And then some other people are left to just manage this thing over the next 5 to 10 years. Well, that doesn't work very well. It has to be, when you run a business, the incentive is perpetual, right? So that's how we set them up. And some of the means of innovation that I've done in the last couple of years is looking at different markets that the service provider is looking for some help to go grow their business. So there's something in it for them, and you actually are getting, you're sharing in some of the reward for that. It's also new service lines and technologies, and then the last thing is where I've found this gaining real value in these relationships is bringing them in close to your business transformation, rather than just being a commodity provider of a service. You have the commodity services as part of the relationship, but make them a strategic business partner in that they are very close to your business transformation. So they have visibility to your portfolio of change initiatives for the year with the outcomes, and they're recognized by your senior management team for achieving those successes. So when you pull all that together and you innovate together on all levels, it just really gets the attention of the leadership at the service provider. You become a more strategic partner to them, and it just gets better results, I find.
And Mike, your experience, how these deals have changed from your vantage point?
I don't know that I have a whole lot to add. I would concur with both Steve and Phil that, that is the area that you need to look within the partnership and with the business and how you move forward. You got to be in lockstep.
Yep. So, I'm always asked, Harry, if you're back, if not, maybe Steve can jump in. In an outsourcing engagement, clients ask me, what should they be doing themselves in-house? What should they be hiring an advisor for? If they hire an advisor, what aspects are, ideal for hiring that advisor? So, what's your sense as to kind of, what you should do in-house and what you should, seek external help for?
Obviously, I'm biased, but I think that we're in a new era of outsourcing. The deals are different. They're not price-focused. They're business outcome-focused, and most internal groups don't have that kind of experience. They experience with the broad sort of array of technologies that are available. They probably don't have experience with automation. They probably don't have pricing. And they probably don't have the ability to align with the business the way an advisor would be able to. So they're the big reasons why I think advisors are needed. I mean, if it's just a straight-up procurement deal, most people could do that themselves. Everyone knows how to do, RFPs and let's vendors.
Yep.
It's pretty much a commodity service.
Yeah, and Harry, if I could add, what I was talking about earlier about that gap that starts to exist, what seems like a very tactical, transactional, there's got to be somebody who is a conduit to the business strategy. Because, I think it was mentioned earlier, every business change event has an IT, right? And so no matter what the transaction is, it is touching us either one or many different strategic change initiatives in the company in some way, shape, or form. And too often you see work done, transition work like this done without having that as part of the overall plan. And it can create some real risk and problems. That's why you see, for not only internally with the business, but with the service provider as well. Because what happens is there's missed expectations. There's expectations of a certain degree of performance and delivery where things were missed, and it creates a lot of problems in the relationship.
Mike, how did you determine in your role there at Honeywell? How did you determine what to do in house versus go external for?
Well, I think the market changes so fast, and technology is introduced at such an amazing pace that I don't think a CIO or his team can be knowledgeable in everything. I think part of that is being honest with yourself and saying you don't know what you don't know, and then using an advisor to help partner with you, understanding the strategic link to the business, to many of the things that Harry had to say, that benchmarking, who's doing it differently, who are the providers that partner with, who's better at doing it, I think is the way you got to go. I think there's, to the point on just doing a sourcing deal, anybody can do that. And I think different IT organizations will do different components of each better than they do others. And I don't think it's a cookie cutter type analysis on every IT organization. I think every IT organization is different. And I think it goes back to being honest with yourself, understanding what you don't know, and not being afraid to ask, and have the confidence to go out and find an assistant or somebody that can help you navigate that area and that market. I think it's critical. You can't possibly know everything that's going out in this changing market, and these new technologies are popping up, new companies are popping up, and they're growing at an amazing pace. And I think it's critical to be able to know when to ask for some help.
Yeah, it's a great point, Mike. Great point. So, at this point, we've got a few minutes left. I want to make sure we open it up to the audience here, and so you could all ask your questions to the panel. So go ahead and start sending those questions in. We'll try to get as many as we can answered. And actually, there's a couple in already. So let me start with. Let me go back to you, Mike. The first question is around outcome-based outsourcing deals. Have you done any in your career? And if so, what sort of outcomes have you measured?
I have not done very many in my career, very few. And I guess, the different things where we would measure would be by doing it and changing process, what would the impact the service level deliveries, customer service, what is the ease of doing business use, what are the analytics of coming and dropping down the number of issues, problems, and this was particularly around a service desk. So that's been my experience, but maybe there's some folks on the panel that have done more of those types of transactions. I've done just a few.
And Phil, how about you?
Yeah, with outcomes-based outsourcing, you could have five different people and get 5 different definitions of that, right? So I tend to lean way to the business right, if you will, where at this point, all dollars spent on IT, lights on operations and transformational, have to be tied into a group that belongs to the business and runs the business. So true business outcomes. So for instance, if we're going to go build a new data center, or move a data center, consolidate, or move service operations, it has to be tied to the business strategy. So it becomes a business outcome, which says, if it's 3 years from now, where do we want to be? Are we going to do a lot of acquisitions? Are we going to double our size? Are we going to consolidate? Are we going to expand geography, become international? All that has to be part of the decision process, which is business outcome. That's how I look at a business outcome. Because I think you could end up looking at an outcome based on, well, I'm going to take these 2 data centers and create one, and it'll cost me 30%. I'll save 30% a year on running data centers. That's not a business outcome. That's transactional, right? Of course, you can do that because those decisions will get you in trouble because you have those. You're going to have surprise moments down the road where the business is off executing a strategy and IT is not prepared to deliver. You know, there's some gap in some way, shape, or form, and so all the IT execution is driven by outcome expectations by the business.
You know, I think there's another way to look at it as well, and that is where we've actually done deals where the IT component of an outsourcing deal has caused cost increase for a firm. So if it's new capabilities, for instance, we did a deal where there was new software required, new infrastructure to support the software, new network, new training, and in particular tools around analytics that would help a firm actually increase their revenues. That was the measure, increased revenues. So it was actually a greenfield outsourcing deal that cost the company incrementally more money. But the value and the return on investment for the outsourcing deal was astronomical. So these things in terms of IT not owning IT, the business owning IT, and the business making decisions on how they're going to invest, increasing revenues or decreasing costs or satisfying some sort of risk component, is the way to take a look at it. It has to be a holistic sort of view. What the business benefit? And sometimes the IT costs.
So we lost you at the end there, Harry, but I think the point was well taken. So let me just jump to the next question here. Steve, how about for you? So the question is, have you ever heard of IT as a utility model? I'm sure you have. So what are your thoughts on that, IT as a utility model?
Sure. For services that are used throughout the enterprise, yes. And, you know, IT would be, you know, just like any other utility, expecting a service in a certain way at a certain service level, absolutely. There are probably some other solutions and other services that they're offered to maybe certain select groups that can be, for lack of a better word, utilitized. But for the most part, there are certain enterprise-wide services that could certainly be utility. What we're also finding is that, you know, IT can also be a broker for various services, so that there can still be a technical and a business vetting or just an understanding that's shared with the business and really reviewed, so that, you know, new solutions that are being considered by the business, you know, have some review by the IT organization. Really important to make sure that some of the technical solutions will work in the environment and so forth. So I see not only utility-based services, which I'll refer to as, you know, enterprise-wide, you know, just like dial tone. But I also see IT as a broker. So if you need certain virtualization services or need certain, you know, development environments spun up by certain providers, IT can be the conduit and the technical conscience behind those kinds of initiatives.
So I think we have time for one last question, and it's one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, especially with a Wall Street conference coming up. So how do you address regulatory issues? Mike, you've worked in some of these highly regulated companies. So how did you tackle it?
Well, I think you've got to find what you're comfortable with and outsourcing in those areas. And then from a regulatory standpoint, what you do outsource, that you feel you've got a partner that can fulfill the commitment of what you need to do from a statutory regulatory type of situation. I think when you go back to contractually, I think it's very, very important what you do that. And I think as being a global company, there's no way you can avoid it. But you really, really need to pick a partner, understand their capabilities, how it fits your requirements, and what are the impacts if for some reason you come out of compliance, or how you report an infraction, or those kinds of things. I think just because it's a regulatory type item isn't a mean to shy away from outsourcing, but I think you need to be extra cognizant of what you do, how you do it, and understanding the subtleties within the regulations and your partner's capabilities.
Yep. No, thank you. So Dominic, we've got a couple minutes left. I think I want to hand it back to you just so you can kind of put a wrapper on this before we close out.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I mean, good conversation, and it's part of the goal that I had coming into the session was to have a conversation that encourages us to think differently. I think not only are we better in our jobs as IT and business leaders when we do that, but I actually think the outsourcing industry is better for it when we do that. I think that there's so much innovation and capabilities out there, and to the degree of which we can adopt a transformational mindset, it gets us to a better place. So my contact info is at the bottom, by the way. If anyone wants, for any reason, to talk more about W Group, feel free to reach out at any time, or connect with us on LinkedIn or follow us on Twitter. And then I guess I'll turn it over to you, Dan, to close us out.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic, and thank you to W Group for participating and driving the content here and the white paper that we recently jointly put together. So real quickly, I just want to make everybody aware of a couple Outsourcing Institute events that we've got coming up. We have a Outsourcing Automation Innovation Seminar in London next week, and we'll also do it in Chicago in June. Our Wall Street Tech Conference, to that last question around risk and regulatory compliance, that's what we're talking about throughout that day on May 24th, all around emerging technologies through the lens of risk and compliance. We have a Digital BPO Innovations Conference in October, and our automation conferences this December. So with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you again to our panel. Appreciate everybody's perspective. I thought it was a great discussion, and let's keep the conversation going. We have a Twitter handle, and we'll keep the conversation going. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks, everybody.